Clerk will call the roll.
Glenn Whitley, County Judge.
Here.
Roy Charles Brooks, Commissioner Precinct 1.
Present.
Devin Allen, Commissioner Precinct 2.
Here.
Gary Fickus, Commissioner Precinct 3. J.D. Johnson, Commissioner Precinct 4. Constitutes a quorum.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Garcia, come on down.
Good morning.
Good morning. Hi there.
Thank you. We come today to ask the court to canvass the results of the general and special elections held last November 5th, 2019. This is a requirement of Section 67003 of the Texas Elections Code, which requires that we complete this, officialize this canvass no later than today.
Move approval of the canvass.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Motion will pass unanimously. Okay. Now, I think there may be some questions. Maybe not.
I'll be glad to take them.
Well, so I'll start then. Hyder, can you share with us how you feel like the election went, especially given vote centers, implementation of that, and then also the deployment of the new equipment?
Okay. The short answer is I think it went very well. Not perfect, certainly, never is, but we have identified opportunities for improvement. Considering that we added new equipment, we had vote centers, we had an off-the-charts turnout for what we were expecting in this kind of election, I'm very satisfied with the results. That's not to say, just for anybody listening to this, and that there is not some work to be done in certain areas so that those birth pains are smaller next time around. But that was the intent of doing it this November, making sure that we didn't feel these birth pains in March. So that's my 30-second version of it. With regards to the equipment, I think it performed pretty well. I think a lot of the issues we found were the shock of dealing with it for the first time. Think about it on early voting. When you compare early voting to election day, early voting was pretty quiet, I would say, because those poll workers that are used to working on early voting were used to setting up a number of devices to handle the location. So they were used to setting up what we used to call JBC, for every booth where you had to vote, because we had the all electronic, no paper. So it went pretty smooth. Most of the shock was on election day, because these poll workers were used to setting up one device only, but mostly having the polling place set up by laying out the booths, the tables where people would fill out the paper ballot. So I think they had a bit of a shock in that morning, and we got to get all this equipment laid out and ready to set up. How it performed after that, the general feedback is, and I have some letters and feedback that we've received saying, once you got it up, the process flowed pretty smooth. Then there is the experience of the voter. So some voters did have some shock in trying to insert that paper sheet into the machine, and understanding, it kind of hangs out from the machine while you're making your selections, but eventually it's all taken in by the device to print it. Again, first time interaction with it is probably the biggest difficulty we faced on that. When it comes to vote centers, and we have a public hearing for that tomorrow, we'll go into details and numbers. But in general terms, I think vote centers, you can probably call it the pain pill for the birth pains we were having with the equipment. It really helped a lot. In some of the cases where there was a bigger difficulty doing the setup, for some poll workers to say, we're not ready yet, it might take us another 10, 15, 20 minutes, but down the corner there's a church and they are ready to go. And so we know that some voters actually decided to move to other places. We know that some voters ended up saying, I may not have time now, I'm going to be late to work, but then during the day they said, you know what, I ended up voting close to work. That worked for me. So again, not minimizing or dismissing those birth pains, but also acknowledging that that was a huge help, having vote centers. And again, we'll go into, unless you want me to do this now, but we'll go into some of those numbers that will show you why I think vote centers actually drew more people in to the turnout, and explains a little bit of this surprising turnout we had in this election.
Hyder, I share your impression that overall it went very well. I liked the new machines. I thought voting with them was a rather fun experience. I did receive a letter from an election judge critiquing the process, and I thought he made some valid points. I don't have the letter with me and don't remember who it was from, but I assume that all of us got a copy of the same letter. He was concerned about the throughput, the ability to get a person in and out. And he cited specifically that under the old system, when things got crowded, they could break out some paper ballots and ease the pressure on the line by having people vote by paper ballots. Well, under this new system, that's not possible.
Correct.
So what are we going to do to make sure that the throughput is manageable? He gave some statistics that were pretty startling in terms of the amount of time that it would take a line of, say,
100 people.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, so I do know the letter. And again, these are some of the numbers I was saving for tomorrow. But one of the things that proved key, I believe, in what the turnout that we saw on November 5th was that decision, which we would have made, we were planning on making regardless of equipment or vote centers, to stay at the locations that are early voting locations in a precinct and not move out and into an alternate location. And the example, the best reference, I think, for everyone in this election was Keller Town Hall. So in the past, we used to do early voting in Keller Town Hall, then shut it down and move to a church, I don't remember the name, for Election Day. And so we even before, a couple of years ago, used to have what we called a voter lookup crew left behind in Keller Town Hall, which was basically just intended to direct people who kept showing up at Keller Town Hall and say, well, you should go here, you should go there. And so we realized that doesn't make sense. People are seeing this place for 2 weeks in a row here saying, you know, vote here, and then they show up on Election Day and we're not there. So you're going to see in Keller Town Hall, if I think that's the one, if it's not the one, it's still in the top 5, that had almost a 3,000% increase compared to the last similar election. I think a lot of it's got to do with that. In the past, without vote centers, we would have told them, you got to go somewhere else. We were able to take them in now. So how are we going to do that? One, that's one of the lessons learned. In those places where we did that, the sub-courthouses, the town halls, those are not going to be sized based on the historic turnout of the precinct because they keep acting like an early voting location and bringing thousands of people in. So they're going to be maxed out. And we're going to reach out to the entities and say, we can't, and I'm not talking about Keller Town Hall only in this statement, but we can't keep getting the small room for the small election. We need the big room all the time. Some locations have, and it happens in all precincts, in all commissioner precincts, you have a foyer and you have a gym in a school. It's a small election. Take the foyer.
Yeah.
No, we need the school because then we can deploy all the equipment we have available. And I'm mentioning Keller because at some point we had someone, actually Troy was there, the assistant elections administrator. He went there in person and said, I brought them out from 5 to 10 machines and we can fit no more in the room. From this point on, the line just, it happens that way. There's no more physical space to do it.
Are we going to have enough machines?
Yes, sir.
To handle a presidential general election?
I believe we are, and those lines again were due mostly to the size of the room and that sizing based on the turnout of the precinct, which we had bumped up, but 3,000% was certainly not
We
within
only
anyone's.
used 1,700 of the 3,000 machines.
Is that right? Okay.
So we only used about.
That makes
50%.
me feel better. So we've got some capacity.
Yeah, we do, and you know, we're still in that phase where we're letting all that feedback pour in. We've got that letter, we've got a few other emails and phone calls that have made and notes that we made and so we'll start reaching out to them. And one thing I'd like to explain to this judge is, we even have a pattern of how people behave and what the worst hour of the day is. We know that about 15 to 20% of the people who show up at a location show up in the last hour. And so we're sizing to at least be able to process that within an hour in hopes that we can guarantee if you get there, if you're in line at 7, you should be out of there no later than 8 if it's a horrible case. So that's where the math behind it is going.
General election, oops is not going to be an option.
Correct.
Plan for oops.
Will do, sir.
And I think a lot of that is gonna go back to the training, and I think we will hear training mentioned many times. The other thing that I had thought about, and I've asked Hyder to go back and look at a cost associated with it, is some sort of a video that we could actually throw up on the wall where it talked about, here's how you put the ballot in the machine, you don't jam it in here, you don't do this, you don't do that, how do you scan it in, and different things along that line. So as people are standing there, they will have an opportunity to look at that. And then I think we need to focus on a lot of the training with our election workers being, and I know that timing is always a problem from that standpoint throughout, but we need to have a focus of we have a lot of opportunities for training the week before election day or whatever, because one of the comments that I heard from someone I talked with was, well, yeah, I went through training, but it was 8 weeks ago, and by then, I had trouble remembering my name after 8 weeks, let alone how to hook up a machine. And so I think that's also one of the things that we need to look at. So I think, and we'll talk about a lot of this, I'm sure, again tomorrow.
Yeah, and talking about equipment, because tomorrow the public hearing is for vote centers, and I really, if possible, like to keep it on that topic because that goes to the state for us to be able to request a permanent status in vote centers, and I wouldn't want them to be confused on things. But when it comes to equipment, one of the things we realized is we're going to have to train everyone from scratch again. So if you've been a poll worker for 12 years, we're back to zero, at least on setting up the equipment and everything that spins off from that change, right? So some of the forms and some of the processes and where to put the seals, and that's all affected by that change. And so we started early because we said, it's a lot of people. To train 2,000 poll workers in 2 weeks would pretty much require like having 10 classes a day or something. We're going to have to look at that. But that's why we started so early. One of the changes we did, which I think was very well received by poll workers, was the design of the training program. So we used to have separate classes. You come in for equipment training, you come in for poll book training, you come in for forms training. And we wanted to make that a single class. Now it's longer. It's like 4.5 hours. But when you get there as a poll worker, you have a container like the one you have on election day, and we say, welcome to your polling place. You're going to break the seal and start from scratch. Everything that you do on election day, you're going to do in this class. And so, longer class, newer equipment, newer everything. We didn't want to risk running out of time in the last 2 weeks. We intentionally started way ahead. But yes, the lesson learned was people said, that was 6 weeks ago. I'd like to have a refresher or something. So we need to balance that out in the plan for March to make sure everyone goes through. We trained about a little over 1,600 poll workers. We ended up using over 2,000. So it tells you about 25% of the people helping us out there didn't go through training. And we trained all the judges and all the alternates, as many clerks as we could, but we had people out there who just didn't make it to training, couldn't fit their schedule, and they were just out there helping us. We had 160-something people we trained that didn't end up working. So there was a lot of, we gotta get people there to help and count on the training of the 1, 2, 3 people that we did train to help them direct how to do some of the work there.
Do we pay the people for training?
Excuse me?
Do we pay them for training?
Yes, we do, sir.
Maybe one of the, and this may be a bad idea, so let me just preface that before I get conked on the head for saying it. But if we pay somebody for training and then they don't end up, maybe we don't pay them for the training until they actually come to work.
We can talk about it. I just want to make sure it's not explicit in the code or something like that you have to get paid for training.
This is a very sensitive population. And you start messing with their money, then you're going to have problems filling the positions.
I hear you. That's why I said it. It was just an initial thought. But I mean, if we're paying
Because the
somebody
money
for
is
4 hours,
not enough to compensate them for their time. They do it because they want to. They do it because they love to. They do it because they want to help with the process. It's not really for
what
the
are we
money.
paying
$25 for the training class.
for the whole 4.5 hours?
Yeah.
I agree.
Don't rock that boat.
So, and I mean, again, I don't want anyone to feel that when I say this, I'm dismissing the incidents we had out of an overall big picture that looks good. I mean, every one situation where we had a voter with disability who wasn't served the way they should have is important to us.
Who happened to work for Star Telegram.
And again, regardless of who it happens to, we want to make sure that we, look into the root causes of that and we fix them so we minimize those incidents. But going back a year ago, November 2018 was the first time we used the electronic poll books. And the feedback we got was, this is complicated, this is difficult, this is going to be a problem. A year later, the feedback we're getting is, these machines are tough, we got to set them up, but we love the poll books. They make our lives so much. So again, I think as we break into them, as we get comfortable with them, as our poll workers understand the value and get more, confident on, I am going to be ready at 7 a.m. and I figured out what it is, it's going to go that way. Even some of the ones that had challenges, again, said, yes, it was probably too much information to recall and put it together by 7 a.m. But once you did, wow, yeah, this whole thing put together makes our lives much easier. They don't have to decide what ballot type to give. They don't have to remember to mark a provisional. There are a lot of things in the flow that we wanted, and I think we got there, to make sure that for them was like the supermarket cashier. Just scan the barcode and it'll weigh itself, it'll mark itself, it'll run the discount, it all happens. And so I think we got there. It's just breaking into it.
Well, I received one email with a constituent concern, which I think you received as well. And I heard earlier in your remarks that you all will be responding to some of those specific concerns. So thank you for doing that. I'd say before election that I talked with one election judge in Mansfield who had been an election judge for years, and her general sense was that she was overwhelmed that she'd only have an hour. But she said, I've been to training and I'll just have to review my notes, and I think I'll be ready. I didn't talk to her throughout the early vote period or an election day. During early vote, as I was just out in the county, I'd stop by and say hello to the folks working at the various locations, and by and large, people seemed to have a positive experience, whether they were there voting or if they were there working the polls. And then I went to LZ Odom on election day just because that's where I went to general last year, and I know it wasn't apples to apples. This was maybe around 2 or so, and I was paying attention to folks as they walked away, and no one seemed to be frustrated from what I could see from where I was in line. I was working my way to the vote. There didn't seem to be any issues when I talked to the staff there. The general consensus was we didn't expect this big of a turnout on this type of election. So.
Yeah. And LZ Odom was one of those sites we kept that was an early voting site that, again, drew a lot of attention. And like many other entities, we need to work with, in that case, the city to say, we need the big ballroom, even if it costs the city money, because that's the way to guarantee better service. More privacy, more space, more machines, more, better service ultimately.
Sure. So one last point for me would be on where are we in the process of determining the polling locations for early vote for the primary?
We have a list. We're in the process of talking to the parties about the election day sites. We are in our part of it, which is early voting. It's in the process of now putting the numbers together to see if that fits the budget we have, to then come to court and say, if it fits, do you want to keep them or not? I'd also like to make sure the court sees the numbers of using those sites on this election, and make a determination there, comparing turnout and sites.
Sure.
There are a couple
Yeah.
places we want to talk about. Off the top of my head right now, I know that like Rosemont Middle School, I believe that's in your precinct, Commissioner Brooks, is one that always has an incredibly low turnout, and even the judges complain about the facility. And apparently one that we used was the James Avenue Service Center a couple of years ago, and people turned out in bigger numbers and were happier with the facility. So those kinds of proposals will be put for the court's consideration when we come out with those lists.
Okay. Well, I think you probably know which location that I'm going to be interested in is UT Arlington,
Yep.
serving as a polling location.
Yep.
We did, and I think your office may have received it as well, if I can remember who all was copied, but a letter from their student congress and some of the other student organizations that were concerned about UTA being included in future elections. So,
And I think we're very interested in doing that, and I agree. I think we need to look at the numbers though also,
sure.
because, and I may have remembered this entirely incorrectly, but I believe UTA had something like 2,400. It was not the leader in the number of votes that went to the, on the temporary deal. In fact, it may have been near the bottom. I still think we need to put it, I think there are going to be locations that we need to look at, and it may be that we decide to take every one of our temporary locations and make them a permanent. But I think when we do that, we're going to have to be much more focused on where we put them on the campus, if we put them on the campus.
Right.
The other side of the other question I guess I have, especially regarding the primaries, does this court ultimately decide where they're going to be, or do the parties who are paying for it ultimately decide where the votes locations are going to be?
For early voting, we do it. We pay for it. We don't get reimbursed for any of the expenses in early voting. We're the ones who run it. We have to have that formal meeting with the parties to formally agree. That's coming this Thursday is what we're looking at. To sign off on the usual process, I'm the early voting clerk. They both entrust me with it, and then we decide the locations and the whole thing. For election day, the parties, they tell us these are the sites we want. So that's what I was referring to when I said
So
that's what
early
they are
voting,
working
we
on.
decide.
Yes, sir.
Seems to me to be just back, well, that would be for the primaries as well as the general.
Yes. And the general, we decide the election day as well.
Okay. So they don't have any decision in the general election.
No,
No.
It's just on
The
the
court. It's
primary
the commissioners.
day, election day
correct.
of the primaries, they decide where they want those
Correct.
election sites to be.
Correct. And now we want them to agree on the sites so that the primary can be in vote centers mode as well on election day.
The other thing that I think we've really got to try to get out there is the importance of being prepared to vote. When my wife voted, she had gone over, we had talked about the various propositions, and so we each knew exactly how we were going to vote when we walked in there. She indicated that she was able to complete her whole deal in less than a minute, but that she watched some folks trying to read those very well-written propositions and them, spending as much as 5 to 10 minutes trying to figure out exactly how they were going to fall on that deal. I will be very honest with you, I am extremely concerned, just based upon the number of screens they're going to have to go through, not only at the primary level, but also at the general election day level. The length of time it's going to take somebody to cast a ballot. We need to have everything out, except maybe a little bit of a reserve if you want to hold it back to move it someplace. And we ought to have every scanner and every controller and everything we can get in the field in anticipation of what I think is going to, we just think this turnout looked record.
No, we're definitely going to bump it up to whatever the number was last time, at least 15-20%, and say, we're not going to base it on the last or the toughest presidential we've seen, because just natural growth of the population means you're going to have more votes to process. It's just a fact. I don't have numbers to tell you this, with 100% certainty, because part of the way the voting machines protect the secrecy of vote is it doesn't record what time each vote was cast in the whole thing, and there are a series of, I'm having a discussion with a vendor. What I want could be done, which is the machine to tell me, after election when we pull the drive, it was about 3 minutes in average per ballot. But they don't record that to try to avoid any kind of time trace. But we were doing some counts of, okay, if you have these many machines and you have these many people checked in, that should be telling us your average voting time. And again, I don't have a scientific method to assure this, but my first impression is people were voting faster on election day than they were in early voting. Some people might have taken a lot longer, but the rough numbers are like, the only way I can explain what I'm seeing between the two charts is these people are voting a lot faster than these. It's just an interesting fact I'd like to throw out there, because it does seem that more people went in to the polling places on election day with that mindset than on early voting. What I do think we could look at in the future is whether we want to have, and maybe the change in temporary locations solves this, is having more early voting so that more people go on early voting, and also tell people, guess what? You no longer have to make this choice of, I'm going to wait until election day to get a paper ballot, because you get the same thing you get on election day on early voting, and try to drive more people into early voting. That would help a lot. It's more convenient, it's more comfortable. Poll workers are, again, they're cruising through it because they've been doing it for a week. By the third day, they're like teaching us how to do things we didn't even know. So it's a better service, honestly. I think people ought to know that. It's more convenient.
I think a lot of people have waited till election day so that they could use a paper ballot. But I also, and the other thing we have to do is to figure out a way to make sure they don't walk out of there with that paper ballot.
Oh, yeah.
And I do think that happened, because people are used to hitting the button, the ballot's cast, and, oh, they gave me a receipt of how I voted. That's nice, and walked out with it. So we're going to have to, I think, do that. The other thing that I wanted to be sure and understand, and I hope I do, is that the opportunities for folks with disabilities to vote are exactly the same for this equipment as are very close to being exactly the same as they were for the last equipment. And again, if someone did not have the opportunity that they had previously, it is probably because through training, the folks at that particular location did not understand how to plug in the equipment necessary for the visually impaired, or even the sip and puff operations to work. And
that is very important.
Yeah.
It is, and I want to make sure that judges and the general public hear me say this. When we say it might have been user error, we're not throwing the poll workers under the bus. That can mean we didn't do a good job training them, and we generated poll work error. So we're going to reinforce this in training, figure out how to work with that 4.5-hour class, but it'd be awesome if they did one themselves. But doing a full vote with audio, if you've never done it, can take you up to 20, 25 minutes scrolling, unless we do a shorter ballot. So we'll do something like that, so it kind of makes a more permanent impression on them. But yeah, that's the only thing I would add. I don't want judges to feel that we're throwing them under the bus here.
no, I mean, and that's...
Or that when I say we, I mean we, the Office of Elections.
Do
right? I speak for
we
you.
hand them a booklet? Do they take a booklet out of their training with them?
They had a different one, and they liked the design of the old one better. They're taking two now, the poll book and the machine now, and so that's one of the pieces of feedback we got. Can we get the old book all in one, condensed together? Part of the reason we didn't do it was, again, we were very close to signing a contract with the vendor to election day, and so we had the materials, we had everything, but it was like we didn't want to risk not having enough time to print, so we gave them the two separate manuals. We're going to work towards that unified, like the class manual. It says 7 a.m. Here's how you open the poll book, the machine, and what forms you fill out. 7 a.m.
Who's writing that?
We are. We have all
Define we.
the Office of Elections.
Why don't you have some of the election judges either edit and or assist in that writing?
Definitely something we can do. Yeah. I mean, we would write it, get the draft ready, and say
Yeah, but they've done it.
yes.
I would strongly recommend that you have, once you get it written the way you think it is ready to go, get you a committee of about 10 or 15 of the more seasoned election judges and let them rewrite it for you.
Yeah. Definitely.
So I thought I had my final point, but this is my final
Can't
point.
have
Is regarding training demonstrations, which I think we were in precinct 2 able to host 2 before we just kind of ran out of calendar time. So I'm interested in doing those again leading up to the primary, and we'll be working with your office to get some of those scheduled.
Absolutely.
So we're doing the best that we can to provide as many opportunities for people to be prepared before they show up.
And we did a lot of events.
Yeah.
Then we went into like the second half of November. Once early voting started, it's like everyone said, okay, well, just go and vote, right? We stopped getting invitations and calls and stuff. But yeah, definitely we're in for that.
Why don't we do a YouTube of the different segments of set up the poll book, set up the machine, set up that?
That's one of the things that we've been talking about internally. And in fact, one of our staff members suggested, why don't we talk with one of the colleges and see if a student wants to take it as, a communication student, something as their project for extra credit, help us make our videos for training our poll workers. That'd be awesome.
Well, and I mean, if you did a YouTube, put it online.
Yeah.
That way, before they walk in there that morning, they can, or that night before, they can sit down and look at the YouTubes on how to open the case and how to do all that stuff.
And I've done that in the past, and they look up tarrantcounty.com/elections/videos, and it says how to connect it. Boom. And so it's just a 1-minute segment of this is what I forgot, and it's easier to see it than to flip through the pages.
As long as you're going to do that, then do one from the voter's point of view on how to operate the equipment.
That was a very quick first 101. Hey, let me show you quickly how it works.
Okay.
But yeah, we can definitely do it, and do one in Spanish and Vietnamese, at least a voter experience one, so that you can look it up there.
Any other thoughts or questions at this time?
Thank
All
you.
right, thank you very much. There being no further business to conduct at this time, we're
Thank you.
adjourned.